I'm Sarah Coldrick and I'm the legal consultant for AFA Cymraeg. AFA has been commissioned by the National Adoption Service for Wales to devise a framework that covers the whole of Wales and introduces early permanence to Wales. This particular seminar is for adoption panels, fostering panels, and all those involved with fostering work. Other presentations are going to be available for practitioners, for the judiciary, and for family and friends of people who are interested in becoming Welsh Early Permanence carers. This presentation is going to be specifically around the fostering and adoption panel task. It's important that you look at the framework that's on the National Adoption Service website because that gives all the details. This is really just an introduction. This presentation takes about an hour. There are opportunities for some group discussion, for some individual reflection, and just for some breaks should you want them. So you will see on this slide the link to the National Adoption Service website, and that's where you'll find the full framework. And just to say that framework is divided into sections, and at the start of each section you'll see a what needs to happen document which sets out quite clearly what needs to happen at each particular part of the process. So what are we going to be looking at in this workshop? First of all, just looking at what Welsh Early Permanence is and the legal context for it. We'll then be taking a fairly short look for the purposes of this presentation at planning and referral, at matching, and that's fostering matching and placement, and at information sharing and work with parents. What we will be spending a little bit more time on is the recruitment, assessment and approval of WEP carers, panels and the decision maker's role, and then finally looking at those care plan options and the implications for our practice. So what is Welsh Early Permanence? In essence, it's helping a child who's had to be removed from their parents or relinquished by their parents to find a safe, stable and permanent home as quickly as possible. So this home might be back with their parents, it might be with their wider family, or it might be with adopters. And if you look at those little purple boxes that you'll see throughout the whole of the presentation, they refer back to the framework itself. So in terms of the legal context, what have we got in Wales? Our Welsh Early Permanent carers have to be fully approved as both foster carers and prospective adopters. Some of you might know about fostering for adoption in England, and we just need to be really clear that we don't have that framework in Wales. In England, with fostering for adoption, foster carers can be temporarily approved as foster carers. They don't have to go through full approval. It's almost like a Regulation 26 approval as a kinship carer. We don't have that facility in our Welsh legislation. So Welsh Early Permanence is about full approval as both a foster carer and a prospective adoptive parent. So that means that they will have to attend two panels. They will go to adoption panel first of all and have an ADM decision, and then go to fostering panel and have a decision maker decision then. So that involves our fostering services throughout Wales. Each adoption region has decided that there should be a nominated local authority fostering service provider who will be responsible for all the fostering aspects. So that's approval and support in conjunction with the adoption region. So with SUAS, that is Blaenau Gwent Fostering Service Provider. With a Western Bay, that is Swansea, with Mid and West Wales, that is Carmarthenshire, and with North Wales, that is Denbighshire. With VVC, they've decided to do things slightly differently, and each local authority will take on the approval depending on where the prospective adopter and WEP foster carer lives. WEP carers will be eligible for fostering allowances and also for early statutory adoption pay and leave. So this is quite an anomaly really, because although they are very clearly only foster carers at the early stage, they are eligible for early statutory adoption pay and leave, which is very useful in terms of WEP carers being able to take that leave and not worry about their eligibility in terms of taking leave. And we'll talk more about that later on. And within the framework, there is guidance within the document to help WEP carers in terms of using both that statutory adoption pay and leave and fostering allowance, and saving one of those for the later date if and when they become adoptive parents. At the bottom, you will see that there is an allocation of roles document, and this is a crucial document really within the WEP structure, because it's about this triangle of work that's happening between the child social worker, the adoption social worker from the adoption region, and the fostering social worker. The clarity of who does what is really important, and again we'll be talking about that a little bit later on. Early permanence historically has really been used mainly for babies who are coming out of hospital, often from a special care baby unit or from NICU, who need to be going to straight to a foster placement. We're going to be looking at children where there has been a plan for removal at birth or very shortly after birth, and that has been decided during the public law outline and or the pre-birth planning. Now, Welsh early permanence placement could also take place during care proceedings. So that might be following a parent and child residential assessment, where that residential assessment has disrupted, or where there has been a decision that assessment has not been successful. It may be that a Regulation 26 foster placement disrupts, and where ordinarily a child would have to go into another short-term foster placement before then going on to an adoptive placement if adoption is the plan. If they go into a WEP placement, then it cuts down the number of placements that child is going to. And that really is the whole purpose of Welsh early permanence. It is bringing down the number of traumatic transitions that a child has to go through before they have their final care plan decided upon by the court. Children might also benefit from a Welsh early permanence placement following the making of a full care order by the court. Now, these numbers are not going to be great, but it will be important to have a WEP placement possible for them if they've been placed on a care order, either with kinship carers, kinship foster carers, or they've been placed with parents under the terms of a care order using what we still call placement with parent regulations, and that placement sadly disrupts. Now, ordinarily, they would have to go into another short-term foster placement. What will happen here is that if they can go into that WEP placement, they won't have any more placements than they would have had. And if they go on to an adoption placement with those WEP carers, we have cut down on one transition. What we're going to try and do as we develop this WEP framework within Wales is to develop the inclusion of older children, toddlers and maybe even school-age children for whom adoption is still a possible care plan, and also to include brothers and sisters, siblings who need to stay together. But we do anticipate that it will take some time for us to feel confident and secure in doing that. And as I say, it's more likely that we're going to start with the babies we were talking about earlier. So in terms of the framework itself, you see in the purple box the flowchart 2, which has got the care planning and referral process, and there are specific considerations for relinquished children, and we'll talk about relinquished babies shortly. So this is a very simple depiction of what a child's journey through a Welsh early permanence will be. There'll be a child who's removed from parents under the terms of an interim care order usually, or those few children that we get now who are relinquished. Or that might be slightly older children whose current placement is ending following the making of a care order. And those children are placed with a WEP carer. And it is really important for us to all understand, and for our adopters and our WEP carers to understand, that that placement is purely a foster placement. That is not an adoptive placement. Any decision that a child goes into a WEP placement is not preempting the decision of the court. It's not making any kind of decision that that child needs to be going on for adoption. Parents need to be clear about that. The courts need to be clear about that. Guardians need to be clear about that. And first and foremost, our WEP carers need to be ready for that. And we'll talk much more about that later on. So they're placed with a WEP carer, which is purely a foster placement. And through that, the WEP carer works with the local authority as any other foster carer in reuniting that child with their parents, if that is the decision of the court. Equally, if it's decided that the child should be permanently placed with extended family members, either as a kinship foster carer or as a special guardian, then the carer works with that as any other foster carer would. It is only if the care plan is for adoption, a placement order is made following the making of a care order, which, as we know, signposts that child for adoption, gives the local authority and the adoption agency permission to place that child with prospective adoptive parents. Does that WEP carer become a prospective adoptive parent? So it's really important that we have that difference in role in our minds as panel members, as practitioners, and as carers and prospective adoptive parents. The care planning process is really important. Early identification is crucial. Firstly, because in order to work out whether a WEP placement is the right placement, there needs to be some kind of analysis as to whether adoption is a possible option, and that there's a high possibility of that being the final care plan. And in order to do that, there has to be that identification of family members early on. And so within the PLO process, the pre-proceedings protocol, before care proceedings have started, there should be family group meetings from that very early point to try and identify whether there are family members who are able to come forward and put themselves forward as carers for the child. If there are those people who really do look like they are realistic options, then a Welsh Early Permanence placement may not be the right placement. The other reason why it's important that we identify Welsh Early Permanence as an option at an early stage is in order to provide information to parents. During the consultation process, we did a lot of consultation with parents, and through that we learnt that they want to know as soon as possible what Welsh Early Permanence is, and that they need to have time to process what that is and understand what it is. And therefore it's important, even though adoption is only just one option at the moment, if it is a high possibility of adoption, then there needs to be that real openness and honesty about the possibility of this being a Welsh Early Permanence placement. And that's why it's important that we have this early identification. This is something that's really important for us to get our heads around, really, and it's the use of language within our Welsh Early Permanence. And first of all, to use the word risk. And when we talk to our early permanence carers about the possibility of the child going back home or going on to a family placement, not to talk about the risk, that being a risk, because if the court has decided that that is the right care plan for the child, then risk is not the right word. What we're talking about are Welsh Early Permanence carers being able to take on the uncertainty of their role. And that's something that's so important, and that you as both adoption panels and fostering panel members will want to look at and expect some robust assessment around that. So uncertainty is the word we use in relation to whether a possible return to parent or family members is going to take place, and also what is unknown about a child's development. Because in a little while we'll look at the process in terms of the child referral, and sometimes it can be made in quite a short space of time. And secondly, if work carers are considering taking on a baby, then as we know, there are lots of uncertainties in terms of taking on a child who's very young, who maybe has come straight from birth as a result of a parent's drug or alcohol misuse in utero. So that's the unknowns are something else that wet carers have to take on, and that's uncertainty. The only time we talk about risk really is about identifying whether a wet placement is appropriate at all. Is there a level of dangerousness or violence in the birth family that really reduces the appropriateness of choosing a Welsh early permanence placement? Is that the right option for this particular child? And although we need to be clear about that level of dangerousness being proportionate, there are some families, they aren't many, are there? But there are some families where it would not be appropriate. Because of course what our wet carers are doing as fully approved and fully functioning foster carers is meeting with parents, is facilitating contact, and so they will have that contact with family members. And that's an openness that there just needs to be that risk assessment, and that is part of the WEP framework, that risk assessment, to ensure that WEP framework takes a proper analysis and balance in terms of that risk, but to exclude in the few placements where it would not be appropriate. So going on to the child referral form and planning meeting, we're starting with the child here. And we're going to go on and look at the approval of carers later on. I'm not going to take a lot of time with this, but it's important that you know about the robust process that's happening with the child being referred in. This child referral form is a specific WEP document that's used instead of and not alongside the existing child referral form that is used within fostering service providers. It's completed at as earliest a point as possible by the child's social worker, and that's then shared with the adoption point of contact within the region, who will also share that with the allocated fostering social worker. And you see again this triangle of workers working together, and that's why that allocation of roles document is so important. It should include sufficient medical information. Now, this is one of the challenges of WEP placements. Sometimes WEP placements happen in a very short space of time, and we need to get as much medical information as we possibly can within that short time frame, as well as information about parents and family, including siblings. Because although this is only legally a foster placement, this is a placement that might then become an adoptive placement, and therefore it's important that the WEP carers have as much medical information as is available at the moment, and are able to discuss the uncertainties in relation to that child and whether that's something that they're prepared to take on as a WEP carer. There's then a WEP referral planning meeting, which is chaired by a senior member of the adoption team, following which there's anonymised information about the child which is shared with the prospective WEP carers. And at that time, the adoption social worker will also start to compile a trauma nurture timeline. So think back to the other NAS Good Practice guides. All of that needs to happen as far as it can happen within this short time scale. Relinquished babies, we don't have many of them. When looking at Welsh early permanence, we might think, gosh, relinquished babies are the ideal children for a Welsh early permanence placement. Yes, we might think that, but in actual fact, if you think about it, relinquished babies are very, very uncertain, aren't they? Because of course the local authority is trying to work to reunite children with their parents, and to ensure that that decision is absolutely right, that they wish to relinquish it. And therefore, there is a great deal of uncertainty for wep carers taking on relinquished babies. We need to be very, very clear with our wep carers that they are taking this child on, even though it's relinquished only as a foster carer, and they will not become adoptive parents until the proper consents, etc., have been made. And of course, those of you in adoption panels will be seeing these children coming through for a should be placed for adoption decision, because relinquished children are still brought to adoption panel for those recommendations. So we need to be really clear about how long the local authority has been aware of the parents' plans to relinquish. Is paternity known? Are there viable family members? A meeting with parents needs to take place. There needs to be an agreement over those levels of contact and managing contact. And of course, this is all done on a voluntary basis. And there needs to be a clear plan about life story work. So relinquished babies are not straightforward, and we need to be really clear about the legal process for them, which is so different from children who come through care proceedings. And there is detailed information and advice in the framework. So coming on to wep matching, and this is fostering matching. Adoption matching isn't happening, remember, until the placement order is made, if it is ever made, and then the matching process starts from there within the adoption agency's regulations. The fostering matching and framework document here, it acknowledges the time frame is likely to be very short, but that does not negate the need for good matching. The wep matching framework should be completed as soon as possible by that triangle of workers following a decision to proceed, and then a wep matching meeting is held. Again, that medical information is so important, talking about specific needs, those uncertainties that we've highlighted, the risks that may be involved, and that everybody is updated regularly as more information gets to become known. Parents need to be aware of the information that is being shared with those wep carers, and the wep carers need to meet with parents as early as possible. So there's that openness, that willingness to work with parents that we know from research, we know from what's happened in England really does work in terms of that openness if the placement goes on to adoption. So in terms of the wep placement, good communication is so important. Collaboration, being clear about those roles and those expectations. The adoption social worker provides the majority of support. This is, of course, a foster placement, and it's a full foster placement in line with the care planning, placement and case review regulations. So we need to ensure that all those visiting and reviewing structures are kept in place. In terms of particularly the emotional support, that's going to be provided by the adoption social worker, but it really requires that close discussion and collaboration between all three social workers. And the wep placement, as in any foster placement, will attract a fostering allowance. So those delegated authority agreements, foster care agreement, placement plan, all the things that are required with any foster placement, there are dedicated wep foster documents that specifically meet the needs of a Welsh early permanence placement. So far, we've been looking at how children come through the process and come into a wep placement. Now we need to think about how wep carers are approved. And so we're now thinking about the areas where you as adoption and fostering panel members will be involved. We need to remember at the start that this is predominantly an adoption matter, that our carers are coming from the pool of people who want to become adoptive parents, and that it is predominantly an adoption service. Having said that, of course, as we've already said before, it's very important to understand that within that wep carers are foster carers only to begin with, and may only ever be foster carers for that child. So how do we get through this? We get through it through this particular framework. So we start with the initial recruitment and training process within adoption. All of the regions now have got information that they're able to put on their websites. All of this is contained in the framework, and there is information that can be given at information events or evenings, and also at the start of any preparation training. So right at the start, people are being introduced to the idea of Welsh early permanence, and does it look like it's something that you're interested in? Now, just taking a step back from that, you might be thinking at this stage, why would anybody want to do this? Why would anybody who wants to be an adoptive parent say, yes, I'm prepared to be a foster carer and I'm prepared to take all that uncertainty? And I think we're really helped by looking at the English experience, because that's certainly what a lot of people, and certainly I thought when early permanence first came into England, nobody's going to sign up for this. What's in it for them? What is so heartening is that people do want to do it. They see that it's right for the child, that they're prepared to take on that uncertainty. And though we might have few people taking up to begin with, there is something about the momentum that happened in England, where more and more people became involved in early permanence, that we're sure will happen in Wales as well. If people are interested, then they will attend an Is WEP Right For You webinar, which is an all-day webinar, which really sets out very clearly what is needed in a WEP carer. And we'll look at that in a minute. These WEP webinars are being provided in the first year by AFA, and they'll be done on a remote basis. So there will be people right across Wales joining together to look at whether WEP is the right way forward for them. If at the end of that webinar they decide with their adoption social worker that that is the right way forward, they will then go on to attend a full day with some extra homework, a preparation course for the fostering role. And we'll look at what that covers in a minute as well. So going back to the adoption process, the social worker completes the prospective adopters report, the PAR, and that will have additional information contained in it that looks at the Welsh early permanence aspects, whether they understand what WEP is about, their motivation, their resilience, etc. And they will be helped by that assessment with a visit from the fostering social worker. So the adoption social worker and fostering social worker will visit the applicants together and undertake that joint visit. The adoption social worker then completes the PAR and attends adoption panel, and adoption panel makes a recommendation and the ADM makes the decision. As with any agency decision, under the Adoption Agency's Wales regulations, they are approved as suitable to adopt. And then advice is given on top of that on whether these people are suitable to be a WEP carer, and if they are, on the ages and numbers of children that they might wish to be matched with. Alongside that, the social worker completes a fostering addendum report. Now, this isn't a full Form F, because we thought you would probably, as a fostering panel, go completely bonkers having to read both a PAR and a Form F. Far too much work. And we know that the PAR will involve a lot of material that is in the Form F. As a fostering panel, you will be reading the Form F and also the fostering addendum report that's been written by the adoption social worker, because they know the applicants best, but at the same time the fostering social worker has supported the adoption social worker in terms of meeting those fostering standards. The adoption social worker and fostering social worker then go to fostering panel. So it's adoption panel first and then fostering panel. And fostering panel will recommend, decision maker will decide that the applicants are approved as suitable to foster, and the terms of approval will be approved as short-term foster carers, specifically for a WEP placement. And those terms of approval will reflect the advice from adoption panel about siblings, about ages, etc. So at the end of that, there is full approval as an adoptive parent, and full approval as a foster carer. Our adoptive parents, our prospective adoptive parents are precious material. So in no way they're going to be forced into this. It's got to be absolutely right for them. The Is WEP Right For You webinar will provide a more detailed understanding of what WEP is, what it means for the child and what it means for you as a foster carer, as a prospective adopter. Will help them understand the legal context of a Welsh Early Permanence. They need to understand what care proceedings are about because they're going to be working through them. They're going to be a foster carer through those care proceedings. And the kind of children who might be referred for a WEP placement. They will need to think about the qualities that WEP carers need, what their role is, the fact that they are a foster carer, think about the impact upon them as well as the impact and involvement of their family and their friends and their children, obviously, if they've got existing children. And explore those possible outcomes, that outcome might be that the child is reunited, that is the right thing for that child if the court determines that should happen, or go on to family members, and the implications of that for them as foster carers. So it's only when they've done that and they understand the full implications of becoming a WEP carer that they go on to preparation for the fostering role. The preparation for fostering course, which is about understanding their role and identity as a foster carer in Welsh Early Permanence, that they are a fully approved, fully supported foster carer. They are expected to undertake fostering tasks in the same way as any other foster carer. The applicants will begin to understand their role and their identity as a foster carer in a Welsh Early Permanence placement, the fact that they will have the same daily, weekly, monthly tasks involved. The limitations of the role are in terms of delegated authority. They don't have parental responsibility until such time as the placement order is made and they become prospective adoptive parents. Really important is the matter of contact, because the expectation is that the foster carer, the WEP foster carer, will facilitate contact and will have as much face-to-face contact and handover during contact with the birth family as can possibly be managed and is right for the particular child. So it is about understanding that they will be having face-to-face contact and the development of a relationship with family. Thinking about attachment issues for WEP carers, it's understanding that the child benefits from the development of that attachment. And even though that attachment might not go through into an adoptive placement, it will still benefit them in terms of having that really good quality foster placement for the time that the child is with them. And if, of course, they do go on to become an adoptive placement, then that child doesn't have that transition to deal with. So it's that the whole fostering task is looked at within that preparation course, so that people are under no illusion as to what their role is as a foster carer. So you might want to, just to make sure that you've got the full information, look at the introduction to WEP and that first flow chart, the legal framework. Look at the information pack for prospective applicants so that you can see what your applicants have seen in advance of coming to panel. Look at the guide for the adoption social worker and the PAR, so that for both adoption and fostering panel members who are going to see this PAR, what are you going to be expecting to see in terms of the Welsh Early Permanence? There's WEP information for referees. Referees are really important because they're being asked to look at the resilience, the understanding of WEP carers, not just as prospective adoptive parents, but as possible foster carers. So referees have a particular role to play here, and there is specific information for them within the framework. And then there's the guide for social workers. That's for adoption social workers and fostering social workers. What needs to be included in the addendum report for foster panel, so that you can see as panel members, as fostering panel members, what you should be seeing in that addendum report. There's a WEP checklist, and this is particularly useful for the fostering social worker to be able to see the comparison between the adoption of fostering regulations in terms of the checks. They're very similar. There are very few that are needed in addition for fostering, but they are there. So that checklist is really useful. And then also the fostering competencies are there if that's what you use as a fostering panel and agency. So what are we looking for with a Welsh early permanence carer? Well, this is somebody from England, but it's a really useful quote. Whilst you need to be utterly committed to the child and excited about the possibility of adopting, you also need to be fully aware of the rights of both parents and children and the court's ultimate role in decision making. You need to be wanting the best for the child, even if the best is not being with you, as however great adoption is, it does have a huge impact for the child and can't be taken lightly. And I think that probably says it all about Welsh early permanence, getting that balance, making sure that people really do know what they're taking on, but at the same time that they're taking this on because they want to do what's right for that particular child. So you might want to think at this time, have a pause for thought, either by yourself or in a group discussion. What additional kind of evidence and analysis are you going to be looking for? First of all, in that extended PAR that covers WEP for adoption panel, and secondly, the extended PAR plus addendum for fostering panel, in order to support your recommendation as an adoption or fostering panel and as a decision maker. What qualities are we looking for with WEP carers? And I think we can look at all of these little boxes and think, well, we want those for all of our foster carers and for all of our adoptive parents, don't we? Well, we've got to think about this particularly in relation to WEP carers. And I think in terms of being adaptable, it's about being able to work as a foster carer, and foster carers do need to be adaptable so far as contact is concerned, to be able to do what's right for the child and facilitate that contact and understand that they're doing that for the child. Resilience. I think this is a major thing that we need to be looking for with our WEP carers, because they are going to have to be ready and willing to be able to go with whatever the child's care plan is, and that may well be for reunification, it may be for placement with extended family members. Or although the chances of reunification might be slim with a particular child, there can never be any kind of absolute guarantee that that child is going to stay with them, and people have to be resilient, and they have to have a resilient framework of support around them. So again, we talk about a good support framework later on. They need to be child-centred, because that's what WEP is all about. It's not about I want a child as an adoptive parent, but I want to be an adoptive parent, but I can see that this is the right thing for some particular child, and I am prepared to take that uncertainty on. And if the child stays with me, that's wonderful, but if the child goes home, that's also great, and that's not the right child for me, and maybe next time the child will be right for me. Fulfilling contact arrangements, really important. As we know, particularly with very young children, those contact arrangements are going to be sometimes a number of days a week, depending on what the court dictates, and they might involve some distance. Obviously, we're looking for WEP carers who live within reasonable geographical distance of family members, but they're obviously is going to take up a lot of time, as it does with a lot of foster carers' time. So it's that real commitment to those contact arrangements, understanding what they are, the accepting of uncertainty. It's not about just looking at percentages and saying, well, the likelihood is it's going to be all right. It's a real deep acceptance that child may not stop with them. A good support network. And that's why we're doing a presentation to family and friends, so that they understand, because it's not the same as supporting a straightforward mainstream adoptive placement. family members are going to have to accept that this is a foster placement and that the child may not remain there. And so they need to understand that throughout the whole of the placement and be there to support with any transitions. Empathy, as I've said, it goes along with being child-centred, but particularly to have empathy for parents. And I think this is one of the things that we've learned from the English experience, is that meeting with parents, that developing that relationship with parents does happen with wet placements. And that develops a two-way empathy, an empathy that birth parents have for adoptive parents, and certainly that adoptive parents have for birth parents. And that bodes very well for the kind of contact, the quality of contact that takes place into the adoptive placement if adoption is the final care plan. And lastly, confidential. This is important for all foster carers, obviously, but it may well be that these WEP carers have a little more information than most mainstream foster carers would have at this early stage. And it's very important that they keep that information confidential, even in the context of their own family network, their own home. And so it's very important that they understand that need for confidentiality. There are other qualities that I'm no doubt you can think about and that you as a panel will want to discuss, but those were the ones that we thought that were the main ones to start with. Have another think then again, how will you be sure, as either an adoption panel member or a fostering panel member, that you're making recommendations that were within your particular remit? So, and in a little while, we'll go through those again. So being clear, what am I making a recommendation about as an adoption panel member? What recommendation am I making as a fostering panel member? And what additional support and guidance do you think would be helpful when considering prospective WEP applicants? So you will have, in your discussions and your thoughts that you've just had, been really clear that you need to be crystal clear about those recommendations. So just to go through them again, in terms of adoption panel, you're going to be looking at the applicant's PAR with those additional elements that are relevant to Welsh Early Permanence, and that's presented to panel for a recommendation and an ADM approval, and that's under the Adoption Agency's Wales regulations as any other mainstream approval. But you've also got that additional information about their suitability as a WEP carer. Under the Adoption Agency's regulations, you are only considering, are the applicants suitable to adopt a child? But you can then give advice, as you're able to under the Adoption Agency's regulations, about other aspects. And you will usually give that advice, won't you, regarding ages of children, numbers of children, sibling groups, etc. But in addition, you will be giving advice as to the suitability of that prospective adopter to become a WEP carer. And that is advice that's being given essentially to the fostering panel. Now it's up to fostering panel and then fostering service provider decision maker to make that decision. You don't have any say in as an adoption panel and adoption ADM as to whether somebody becomes a WEP carer, because that is a fostering function. But you can give that advice, and that advice will be very useful to fostering panel and the fostering decision maker. And prospective adopters will attend panel with their adoption social worker, as in any other application. In terms of the foster panel and decision maker, your recommendation and approval. Remember that applicants will have already been approved as prospective adoptive parents, but they're now coming to you for a recommendation and an approval to be a foster carer under the fostering regulations. So the applicant's PAR and the WEP All Wales Addendum report, remember that's been provided by the adoption social worker, but with help and support from the fostering social worker, and it will have its accompanying WEP checklist and fostering competencies that is provided to you as a panel member. And what you consider is, are the applicants suitable to act as a foster carer? yes or no. And if yes, you then have your terms of approval, and those are going to be approved as short-term foster carers and specifically for a WEP placement. And the terms of approval will also probably take into account advice given with the adoption panel and adoption ADM on ages and numbers of children. So, for example, within the adoption agency, if there's been a recommendation and a decision and advice has been given that not only are they suitable to adopt, but they would be suitable to take on a sibling group within a particular age range, then it may well be that the fostering panel and decision maker will want to take on that advice as well. Applicants will attend panel, and this time they'll be coming with their adoption social worker, because although it's fostering panel, that's the worker who knows the applicants best, but also they'll have the fostering social worker there who will be able to answer any questions in relation to the fostering regulations, because you need to be very clear as a fostering panel and fostering DM that you properly meet the fostering panel regulations. So the placement happens. You approve both as an adoption panel recommendation and ADM approval, and fostering panel recommendation and decision maker approval, and the placement happens. We then need to look at what happens at the end of those care proceedings when the care plan has been ratified by the court. What are the options and what are the outcomes? Well, first of all, if there is to be reunification with parents or placement with family members, then you look to the framework, the child's return to parents, what needs to happen. The expectation is, with support, that the WEP carer will undertake that transition in the same way as any other foster carer would to a placement back with parents or with other family members. There will be a review, and depending on whether those WEP carers wish to remain as foster carers, they will either remain or they will resign. It's at this point that these WEP carers need to decide whether, as prospective adopters, they want to undertake another WEP placement. And it's amazing how many people do decide that they want to carry on and do another WEP placement, or whether they decide, no, we've done this once, we've done right by this child, we now want to go into mainstream adoption. We want the certainty of a mainstream adoptive placement, in which case they will just resign with a resignation letter, which will take effect within 28 days under the fostering regulations. If the decision of the court is that nothing else will do but adoption, then a placement order will be made, and then a review takes place, and the adoption agency's Wales regulations come into play, because there needs to be a proper matching decision. So adoption panel, you will see these applicants again. Obviously, if that's the child's adoption region, and you will be making a recommendation as to matching, and ADM will be making a decision. And it's really important that that is not just done as a paper exercise. That matching decision has to be made as robustly as if it was within an ordinary mainstream adoption decision-making process. That's important in terms of the adoption support plan, and before that even, people undertaking and being clear that yes, we do want this placement to go ahead. We are committed to this child. And of course, in the vast majority of circumstances that will happen. They will want to do that, but they need to make that commitment at that stage. The day that the adoption matching decision is made, that is the day that the foster carers transfer into being a prospective adopter. And they cease to be WEP carers, they cease to be foster carers, and they can send in their resignation letter to the fostering service provider. And we need to think about what we need to do to support each option well. And it's important that each option is looked at individually and provided with that kind of support to the child, to parents and to prospective adopters if it goes on to adoption. So that's it. That's quite a short run through. It may not seem short to you, but it's a short run through. What we've been able to do is look at the framework in broad brush strokes. Do go ahead and talk with colleagues, think about it, and join us with AFA and obviously with NAS in looking forward to this as a real move forward in the modernising of adoption in Wales.